All right, welcome everybody to tonight's SABR Central Illinois chapter presentation by Eric Vickrey, Running Redbirds, the world champion 1982 St. Louis Cardinals, which also happens to be one of my favorite teams of all time because I was 11 years old when they won the world championships. So very excited to hear the presentation tonight. I'll start off with a brief bio of Eric, and then we'll get started. Eric was born and raised in Alton, Illinois. He got his undergraduate degree from Bradley University and a master's degree from Midwestern University in Downers Grove. He has 20 years of experience as a physician assistant in emergency medicine and oncology. He began writing articles for SABR's Bio Project in 2020. Running Redbirds, published in November 2023, is his first book. He currently lives in Seattle with his wife, Gina, their dog Bandit, and cats Edgar and Ralphie. All right, I'll hand it over, Eric.
All right, thanks so much. Yeah, so obviously I do have some Central Illinois ties, having attended Bradley, and actually my wife is from Henry, Illinois. Some of you may have heard of that. It's a small town a little bit north of Chillicothe. So it's very cool for me to be able to present to the Central Illinois chapter. So I'll start by telling you a little bit about myself and kind of how I came to write this book. But I do want to give you a heads up that there are some trivia questions as we go along. There's 10 questions kind of scattered throughout the presentation. So maybe have something to write with. I'll give you the questions and then try to write down your answers. And then we'll go over them at the end. And then we'll tally up scores and see who got the most answers correct. And then the winner will get a copy of the book. So my research for this book kind of began on August 10th, 1986. That was the date I attended my first game. It was a Sunday afternoon game at Busch Stadium, Cards versus Pirates. Bob Forsch was the starting pitcher that day for the Cardinals. It was a special day for me, but also for him because he hit his only career grand slam that day.
Oh, wow.
The deciding blow in a 5-4 Cardinals victory. To tell you how rare a pitcher hitting a grand slam was, it would be 9 years before another pitcher would hit a grand slam. Chris Hammond of the Marlins was the next to do it. That same day, Vince Coleman stole 4 bases, electrified the crowd, and I was hooked. From that point on, I was a diehard Cardinal fan. Another interesting note from that game, though, I do want to point out that with the game on the line in the late innings, Jim Leland pinch hit for Barry Bonds with a guy named Mike Diaz, and I have their career war there. So it's an interesting tidbit I found from that game. So that got me really started and on my Cardinal fandom. Like many kids in the 80s, I collected baseball cards. These are some of my favorite players from some of those early years of my collecting. Really from 86 to 1990 were kind of my prime years. I was born in 79, so this is kind of my wheelhouse. And these are some names that you'll see come up later as we go along. The 90s were not so memorable for Cardinal fans. We suffered through some fairly lean years, especially in the early 90s. Who could forget guys like Omar Olivares, Trip Cromer, Juan Augusto, Rob Murphy, to name a few of the somewhat more forgettable players. But then we started having some success under the La Russa era, and I was fortunate enough to attend the 2011 World Series games 6 and 7, which is definitely the highlight of my as a Cardinal fan for sure. So I moved to the West Coast about 10 years ago with my wife. And of course, I've remained a Cardinal fan. I watch as many games as I can on MLB TV. And I kind of got my start in writing a few years ago during the pandemic. It was early on in 2020. Of course, the baseball season was on pause. There was not much to do. We had a 600 square foot condo at the time. So I was more or less stuck inside a good percentage of the time and looking for something to do. And I found SABR and found the Bio Project and started writing. My first bio was on a guy named Cal Browning, who pitched a single game for the 1960 team. And as I gained a little confidence as a writer, I tackled some more prominent subjects, and including Willie McGee and Tom Herr, some of those players from my early years. So I kept up with my writing over the course of 2020, 21. And after about a year or so, I had written, gosh, probably 20 bios, and those are 3,000 to 4,000 words each. So it kind of occurred to me that over the course of a year, I had written essentially the equivalent of a book. So I'd always thought about writing a book, thought it would be a fun thing to do, and suddenly it sort of seemed within reach after I had written all those words. So I decided to tackle the 1982 season. And of course, I was too young to remember that season. So for me, it was going back and sort of living that season over, or for the first time, I guess you could say. So essentially, I relied a lot on newspapers.com. I started in 82, but then quickly realized that in order to get a full grasp of what was going on that season, I needed to go back a couple of years. So I went back to 1980, read essentially every St. Louis Post-Dispatch sports page, so a lot of Rick Hummel stories, and also found some useful information in other regional newspapers like the Belleville News Democrat. Looked up newspapers of opposing teams, and of course the Sporting News. So that was where I got a lot of my sort of day-to-day information, just to get a full grasp of what was going on that year. Some books that I found helpful, probably the most, Whitey Herzog's memoir, White Rat. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. Whitey, as usual, his very candid in his memories and sort of describing what was going through his mind when he was hired as Cardinals manager and went through the rebuild after he was hired. A couple other memoirs, which were I got anecdotes from Ozzie Smith's Wizard, Snap Me Perfect by Daryl Porter. In that, he's very open about his issues with drug and alcohol addiction. Bob Forsch wrote a book of anecdotes, which was fun to read. Rob Raines wrote a book called Whitey's Boys, in which he interviewed a lot of the 82 Cardinals 20 years after the fact and kind of caught up on what they were doing in life. And then there's another McFarland book called Whitey Builds a Winner by Doug Feldman, which is also excellent. Kind of looks at those years in the late 70s and into Whitey's hiring. So I started off by, I really felt I needed to know as much as I could about the 82 season before I interviewed players. So I sort of got a rough draft of the book and then tried to reach out to as many guys as I could. Of course, being a relative nobody, I don't have, and going into this project, didn't have any connections of any kind. So it was sort of just cold calling or sending out letters to some players. And fortunately, some of them responded. First guy I talked to was Jeff Keener, who was a rookie pitcher that year for the 82 Cards. He's from a small town called Albion, which is near the Illinois-Indiana border. He made his major league debut against the Expos that year, came in with the bases loaded against Tim Wallach with the game on the line. And he shared that story, which is really cool, and talked about the veteran leadership and the bullpen with guys like Bruce Sutter and Jim Cott. I talked with Mike Ramsey, a great guy and a backup infielder that year. He hit one of his 2 career home runs in the 82 season off of Don Sutton, and had some really pivotal moments in the season. Filled in for Tom Herr when he was out in May, and then filled in for Ozzie at shortstop in September for 2 weeks as the Cardinals were pushing for the playoffs. I talked to Dane Orge, one of the pinch hitters specialists on the team, along with Steve Braun. Of course, Dane's brother Garth played for the Blue Jays. Dane was a minor league teammate of Lonnie Smith, so I had some stories about playing with Lonnie early on. One of my favorite facts that I came across in researching this book is that Dane Orge has the highest lifetime batting average of any player with 25 or more plate appearances in World Series history. He's 12 for 23 with a pair of walks between the 82 and 85 World Series. Of course, in the 85 series, that was for the Royals, unfortunately. I talked to John DeQuisto, who was a former Cardinal, who was also a minor league, or rather a San Diego Padres teammate of Ozzie Smith, Gene Tennis, and George Hendrick. He shared a kind of cool yet a scary story of having Ozzie having a near-death experience with John while they were driving John's Porsche in San Diego one day. Barry Foote described Bruce Suter's, what it was like to catch Bruce Suter's split-fingered fastball. Barry was a catcher with the Expos and Cubs. George Doc Medich was an actual doctor. He went on to become an orthopedic surgeon, but played in the 1982 season with a medical degree. Interestingly, after that season, he would retire and go into orthopedic surgery residency. But he pitched against the Cardinals in Game 6 of the World Series. So it was kind of cool to get an opposing player's point of view from that series. Talked to Greg Terlecki, a teammate of Force and Hernandez in the minors, and similarly, Randy McGillberry was a good friend with Darryl Porter, so had some good stories about Darryl and also playing for Whitey in Kansas City. So what I found, it's hard to tell the story of the 82 team without going back in time a little bit, and that's kind of what I do at the beginning of the book. Kind of look back at the 70s, which was as I say here, a decade of mediocrity for the Cardinals. You know, they were coming off of a 1960s in which they won 3 pennants, 2 world championships, and were still loaded with talent heading into the 1970s with guys like Bob Gibson, who's still in peak form. Steve Carlton was kind of coming into his own. They had acquired Joe Torre. Of course, they had Lou Brock, so tons of talent. These are all the sort of their individual accomplishments during that decade. Bob Force came up in the middle of the 70s, threw a no-hitter in 78. Hernandez debuted, won an MVP award in 79. And then Templeton came on the scene looking like a potential future Hall of Famer in the late 70s. It's a lot of individual talent and accomplishments, but not a lot of winning. As you can see from their total record for the decade, they were under 500 and won 0 division titles. So here's the first trivia question. See if you can name the 3 Cardinals managers during the 1970s. And I'm looking for the 3 full-time managers. There was a guy named Jack Kroll who managed like a game or 2 as an interim manager, but I'm looking for the 3 full-time managers. And these are a point each. So after a frustrating decade, owner Gussie Busch was anxious to field a winning team and looked to a guy named Whitey Herzog to help him achieve that. Whitey had a lot of success as a manager with the Kansas City Royals in the late 70s, took the Royals to 3 straight ALCS against the Yankees each time they lost. But Whitey clearly had established himself as a winner during that time. Now, Whitey, of course, is from New Athens, Illinois, which is just about an hour east of St. Louis. He talked in his memoir about hitchhiking to Belleville and then catching a bus to go to Sportsman's Park to watch Browns and Cardinals games as a kid. But his favorite team was actually the Yankees. And after high school, Whitey had the opportunity to sign with the Yankees the same year as a guy named Mickey Mantle. And I know Whitey always joked that proudly that his signing bonus was higher than Mickey Mantle's. But they both came up around the same time. One day, Casey Stengel called Whitey into his office and said, Herzog, you're pretty good, but you're not as good as this other fellow I got. And of course, that other fellow was Mantle. So Whitey was traded to the Senators and had a career as kind of a utility man with Washington, Kansas City, and then Detroit. So here's the second trivia question. See if you can name the team and pitcher that Whitey Herzog got his first major league hit against. And I can repeat the questions at the end. So if you don't get it now, I'll give you a chance to, we can review those at the end. So one thing, when Whitey was hired by the Cardinals, he looked at the St. Louis roster and saw that it was very much a station-to-station team. They had some good hitters. They had three guys earning in the top 10 contracts in the game: Templeton, Hernandez, and Simmons. But they played in a massive ballpark. As you can see here from the dimensions of Busch Stadium, it was 414 feet to straightaway center, 383 in the alleys, 330 down the line. So it took a mighty blast to hit a home run out of Busch Stadium. And yeah, they didn't have a lot of guys who had that kind of power. And they also didn't have a lot of speed. And Whitey recognized that in order to cover all the ground at Busch Stadium and kind of take advantage of the AstroTurf, it would be better to have a team full of speedsters. And he kind of made that his mission when he was hired. Now, one of the things that was kind of unique about Whitey's situation, he was hired to be the field manager in June of 1980. The team was mired in last place when he was hired. A couple months after that, though, Gussie Busch fired the Cardinals general manager, John Claiborne, and then promoted Whitey from field manager to general manager. Red Schoendienst took over as the interim manager for the rest of that year. And then after the season, Busch and Herzog got together. They had considered some other guys like Gene Mauch as a potential manager, but ultimately Whitey and Gussie named Whitey as the field manager. So now he had dual titles of general manager and field manager, which was in the game's history is pretty rare. Connie Mack was one of the few to do it, probably the most well-known example. So Whitey had the authority to make the changes that he saw fit, and heading into the winter meetings in December of 1980, he really started his rebuild first with the signing of Darrell Porter, which was an interesting transaction because the Cardinals already had an all-star catcher, Ted Simmons, under contract, but Whitey was not really too keen of Simmons' defense and had Porter in Kansas City and thought very highly of him. And so signed Porter with the thought that maybe he could move Simmons to first and Hernandez to the outfield. But then Simmons said that he wasn't, he preferred to be traded, asked for a trade through his agent during those winter meetings. And then Whitey subsequently traded roughly a third of his 40-man roster, starting with a huge 11-player deal with the Padres that netted the Cardinals Raleigh Fingers and Gene Tennis. Whitey had wanted to make sure that he secured a closer after his time in Kansas City, in which his bullpen let him down several times in the playoffs. He wanted to get an elite closer. So now he had that with Fingers, but Bruce Sutter was really the guy he wanted. And a couple days after acquiring Fingers, he acquired Sutter from the Cubs for Ken Reitz, Leon Durham, and Ty Waller. So suddenly he had two closers, and but Sutter was the guy he wanted, so he decided to use Fingers as a trade chip. Traded Fingers along with Simmons and Pete Vukovich to the Brewers for Sixto Lezcano, a lefty named Dave LaPointe, Larry Sorensen. But the key to the deal was David Green, who was one of the considered one of the best prospects in the game at that time. So heading into the 81 season, the rebuilt Cardinals played well. They were, this is the overall division records here. As you can see, the Cardinals had the highest winning percentage of any team in the division, but of course, 1981 was the year of a player strike that interrupted the season. It subsequently adopted a split season format where the first half winner played the second half winner. So it was actually the Expos and Phillies played each other in a division series, and the Cardinals, like the Reds in the West Division, despite having the best record, were left out. But it was clear that Whitey's rebuild was heading in the right direction just based on that 81 season. Now, something that happened sort of late in the 81 season after play resumed following the strike, things kind of came to a head with between Herzog and Gary Templeton. There's a kind of well-known quote here from Whitey Herzog. He said, talking about Templeton, he doesn't want to play on artificial turf. He doesn't want to play when we go into Montreal. He doesn't want to play in the Astrodome. He doesn't want to play in the rain. The other 80 games, he's all right. And then there was the incident called the Ladies' Day fiasco. It happened on a Ladies' Day promotion day at Busch Stadium. Templeton failed to run out a dropped third strike, and he took some heat from some fans behind home plate, some of which allegedly yelled some racial slurs to him, and he responded by giving them the middle finger and grabbing his crotch. And this is a picture of Herzog yanking Templeton into the dugout that day. So heading into the offseason, Whitey had his eye on trading Templeton and looked around and had some interest in Ivan De Jesus from the Cubs, but ultimately settled on San Diego Padres shortstop Ozzie Smith. But the first move he made that offseason was trading Bob Sykes for a little-known Double-A outfielder from the Yankees named Willie McGee. He got some more speed by acquiring Lonnie Smith from the Phillies as part of a three-way trade. And then after a couple months of negotiations between the Cardinals and Ozzie Smith and his agent, Ozzie had a no trade clause, so there was it took a lot of back and forth in negotiating for Ozzie to waive his no trade clause to come to the Cardinals. But finally, that happened in February of '82. So the third trivia question: see if you can name the team that originally drafted Ozzie in 1976. And a hint: he did not sign with that team. So heading into the '82 season, this is what the Cardinals pitching staff looked like. And what's remarkable to me, and probably is to you as well, is that this is the entire list of pitchers that the Cardinals used for that entire season, which this is probably what the Cardinals opening day pitching staff would look like this year, with 8 relievers and of course 5 starters. But the Cardinals had 5 starters and 5 men in the bullpen. At the start of the year, Andy Rincon and John Martin were both in the rotation. Each of them struggled and were replaced in May or June by Stuper and LaPointe. This is the position player group for '82. One of the better defensive infields ever to play the game, with Hernandez at first, Herr at second, Ozzie at short, and Ken Oberkville at third. They had Darrell Porter at catcher, with Gene Tennis serving as his primary backup, Lonnie Smith in left. David Green started the season as the center fielder, and then Hendrick in right. Trivia question number 4. What team did the BBWAA, the Baseball Writers Association of America, pick to win the NL East in 1982? So things got off to a terrific start for the Cardinals in April. Starting on opening day at Houston, they faced Nolan Ryan, and right away came out of the gates aggressive on the base paths. Lonnie Smith was hit by a pitch, stole second, scored to start the game, and ended up being a 14-3 rout by the Cardinals. They had a 12-game winning streak in mid-April. They're the franchise's longest since 1935. Lonnie had a great month, hit over 300 with a 400 OBP, stole 13 bases. Ozzie Smith hit a home run, which was an incredibly rare occurrence in those days. It was the first he had hit in 4 years, a span of nearly 1,800 at-bats. Bob Forsch had a great month of April as well. So things got off to a terrific start for the Cardinals. Trivia question number 5. Bruce Sutter and Joaquin Andujar finished 3rd and 7th in the 1982 NL Cy Young voting, respectively. Who won the award that year? Cardinals continued to play well in May, despite a number of injuries. Daryl Porter and Gene Tennis both landed on the disabled list at the same time, leaving the Cardinals with an inexperienced duo of Orlando Sanchez and Glenn Brummer. Tom Herr was out for a couple of weeks. George Hendrick missed time. But guys like Mike Ramsey, Tito Landrum stepped up. When David Green pulled a hamstring, Willie McGee came up from the minor leagues, made his debut on the 10th, and got his first hit a few days later against Al Hrabosky. So the bench guys and rookies really stepped up in May and kept the Cardinals afloat during a difficult time, and they maintained their hot start heading into June. What pitcher recorded his 3,000th career strikeout on May 5th, 1982? He was not a Cardinal, I'll give you that hint. June was a difficult month for the Cards. Injuries kind of caught up to them. Herr was still missing time due to some nagging injuries. Daryl Porter slumped. Steve Mura, one of their starting pitchers, as well as Bob Forsch, were both struggling. Even Bruce Sutter, their all-star closer, had a rough month. Kind of lost the feel for his split-fingered pitch, suffered 4 losses, and this allowed the Phillies, who had a rough start, to catch up. By the end of the month, the two teams were tied, and the Expos were only a half game back. Even the Pirates and Mets were hanging around, although the Cubs by then, Cubs fans, they had fallen well off the pace. Trivia question number 7. Name the 2 Cardinals All-Stars in 1982. So July, the Cards turned it around. Despite missing Suter, he pulled a groin muscle in Cincinnati just before the All-Star break and missed a number of games. But Doug Bear stepped up and picked up 4 saves in his absence. Steve Mura turned it around, as did Daryl Porter, and George Hendrick came back from his injuries and was productive. And it's something that is kind of a recurring theme with the 82 Cardinals, is that when one guy struggled or went out with an injury, somebody else always stepped up. It was certainly not a team of superstars, and they had a roster of guys who were more than capable of filling in and performing well when needed. Trivia question number 8. See if you can name the 4 men inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame in 1982. So the Cards, as well as the Phillies and Expos, all kind of remain neck and neck heading into August. Cards had a 6-1 road trip against the Mets and Phillies. Had a good start to that month, but it was kind of a roller coaster of a month. On August 20th, one of the more frustrating games of the season, they blew a 7-0 lead to the Giants. The next day, they nearly blew a 6-1 lead. But thankfully, Jeffrey Leonard made 3 errors for the Giants, and that allowed the Cards to pull off a 7-6 victory. And then there was August 22nd, and I have a video here. I thought I'd let Rick Hummel tell you a little bit about that day.
August 22nd, 1982, Cardinals' 3rd string catcher Glenn Brummer was in the lineup late in the game. Now, Brummer had 2 hits in 2 months, but he let off the 12th inning with a single. Well, eventually, Cardinals loaded the bases. Brummer's at third base, 2 outs. David Green is the hitter. The Giants had a pitcher named Gary Lavelle, a high-kicking left-hander, who was in the windup, paying very little attention to Brummer because who thought anything would be happening. Well, Brummer wants to try to steal home. Chuck Hiller, the third base coach, says, "Nah, this is not a good idea." let David Green hit. And finally, at 1 ball, 2 strikes is the count. Brummer takes off for home anyway. Stunning Hiller, manager Herzog, and the whole Busch Stadium.
Brummer's the big runner. He's at third. 2 down. Sacks jam. Lavelle at the belt. Checks. Brummer stealing home. He is saved. Brummer stole home. The dugout comes out and they congratulate him. You wouldn't believe it. Glenn Brummer.
Cardinals win the game 5-4. But all kinds of questions afterward. First of all, Dave Pallone, the home plate umpire, moved out from behind the plate to the left of the plate to call the slide.
Yeah, so there's no question that Brummer was safe on the play, but sorry, I stopped the video a little early there. But yeah, what Rick was going to say is that Pallone kind of came out of position and never called the pitch. So the Giants argued that it was a strike, which would have been strike 3, but the home plate umpire did not call the pitch, and Brummer was safe. So one of the more memorable moments in Cardinals history, for sure. Trivia question number 9. What player led the 82 Cardinals in WAR, wins above replacement? So September and October, the Cardinals, it was still a very tight division race at the start of the month with the Phillies and Expos still hanging around. And the Cardinals played their final 27 games against division opponents. So it was going to come down to those head-to-head matchups to win the division title. And they had to do it without Ozzie Smith, who missed 2 weeks because of a thigh hematoma. Bob Brindley had a hard slide into second base, which caused the injury. And so Mike Ramsey had to fill in for Ozzie. And even as of September 13th, the Phillies held a half-game lead. The Cardinals played the Phillies the next day. I think one of the more pivotal moments of the season, Mike Schmidt came up with the bases loaded against Bruce Sutter in the 8th inning and grounded into a 1-2-3 double play to get out of the jam. The Cardinals won that game, and I think that was one of the turning points of the season. A few days later, the Cardinals played the Mets in a 5-game series. They played back-to-back doubleheaders to make up rainouts from earlier in the year. And the Cardinals won 5 games within 3 days. And that, coupled with a couple of Phillies losses, suddenly propelled them to a pretty sizable lead with just a couple of weeks remaining. And the Cardinals clinched the division on the 27th. Now, the Cardinals, of course, in 82 are probably most remembered for their speed. They stole 200 bases, had very little power, but it was really their pitching that carried the team down the stretch. There was a stretch in September over a course of 11 games where they allowed 2 earned runs or fewer in each of those games, a 1.00 ERA over those 11 games. Joaquin Andahar for September and the first couple games of October was 5-0 with an ERA of less than 1. Regarding that streak of 11 games of 2 earned runs or fewer, only 3 teams in the live ball era have had longer streaks. The Cardinals team ERA was 2.48 in September and early October. So really carried the team. And they did this despite having the lowest strikeout rate in the league, 4.2. So they had strike throwers who put the ball, let the hitters put the ball in play and let their defense do the rest. And another example of how the game has changed. So the Cardinals had a strikeout rate of 4.2 in 82. Last year, the Cardinals had the 29th highest strikeout per 9 rate of 7.66. So a lot more strikeouts these days than there were 40 years ago. That was one of the Cardinals commercials that year. That was their theme song, Cool in the Gang Celebration. So the Cardinals won the division, and in the NLCS, they would face the NL West champion Atlanta Braves, who were pretty loaded with talent. They had the MVP award winner, Dale Murphy, who had a great season. Bob Horner hit 32 home runs. Chris Chambliss was their first baseman. Their ace was a knuckleballer, Phil Niekro, went 17-4. And they had two guys at the back end of the bullpen, Gene Garber and Steve Bedrosian, who combined to pitch 257 innings and combined for 41 saves. So Cardinals certainly had their hands full heading into that season, and they would encounter some familiar faces in the NLCS. I always find this picture, it's hard to look at, Bob Gibson not in a Cardinal uniform. He was their pitching coach. They had Joe Torre as manager, and another former Cardinal, Dal Maxville, was their third base coach. The Braves had started off the season 13-0, setting a major league record. They had a very sort of up and down roller coaster season. They had slumped badly in the middle of the season, nearly blew the division, but held off LA and San Francisco in the last few days of the season to advance to the NLCS. So game one was a matchup of Joaquin Andujar and Joe Niekro, or Phil Niekro rather. The Cardinals caught a break, however. With the Braves leading 1-0 in the fifth inning, rain started to fall at Busch Stadium, and after a fairly lengthy delay, the game was called and would start from scratch the following night. So the Braves 1-0 lead was erased, and the Cardinals suddenly didn't have to face Niekro for at least a couple days. And this worked to their advantage. Bob Forsch threw a 3-hit shutout in the next night, and they took a 1-0 series lead. And the next day was again rained out, allowing Niekro to come back on a short rest to face John Stupor, a rookie. Willie McGee made a 3-base error, which allowed 2 runs to score. And the game was tied 3-3 heading into the bottom of the ninth when David Green singled, was sacrificed to second, and that brought up Ken Oberkfell versus Gene Garber.
Around the third, comes in to score, and the Cardinals lead 2-0.
So heading to Atlanta, the Cardinals had a 2-0 lead in the best-of-5 series. In Game 3, they knocked out Rick Camp with a 4-run second inning. Willie McGee hit a home run, the only home run of that series. Joaquin Andujar started for the Cardinals, and Bruce Sutter recorded a 7-out save to steal victory. They won 6-2. Darryl Porter was named series MVP after going 5 for 9 with 5 walks. I believe he also threw out a couple of runners. The Braves' middle of the order hitters really struggled, 4 for 32 in that series. So that set up a World Series matchup of the Cardinals versus the Milwaukee Brewers, otherwise known as Harvey's Wallbangers, for their manager, Harvey Keene. The Brewers had just beat an excellent California Angels team in a 5-game ALCS. And the Brewers lineup was stacked. They had Paul Molitor and Robin Yount at the top of the order, 2 future Hall of Famers. Yount actually won the MVP award in '82. They had Cecil Cooper at first base, Gorman Thomas, of course, a former Cardinal, Ted Simmons, and Ben Ogilvy. Those are 1 through 6 were power hitters who drove in a lot of runs. and even Jim Gantner in the 9-hole hit 295. So the Cardinals had their hands full for certain. This is a graph I put together just kind of showing the difference between the two teams in terms of power and speed. The Brewers hit 216 home runs for the season compared to the Cardinals 67. On the other side, the Cardinals stole 200 bases compared to the Brewers 84. Milwaukee outscored the Cardinals by more than a run per game during the regular season. So it was truly a day, on paper at least, a David versus Goliath matchup. Now, there was one thing in the Cardinals' favor heading into that series, and that was that Raleigh Fingers was injured. I would say that Cardinals and Brewers pitching staffs were relatively equal at full strength. The Brewers had another former Cardinal, Pete Vukovich, who won the Cy Young Award in '82 with an 18-6 record. They had also acquired Don Sutton from the Astros at the trade deadline. But Raleigh Fingers had tore a flexor tendon in his arm late in the season, and the injury was actually misdiagnosed by the Brewers training staff. And this was told to me by George Medich, who I mentioned was an orthopedic surgeon. He knew right away when he saw Raleigh's arm when he came off the field. He could actually see the tendon bundled in his forearm and knew that this was going to require surgery. But the team kept him on the active roster, thinking somehow maybe it'll heal. But that never happened, and Pete Ladd, rookie, assumed the role of closer. So game one was a blowout in the Brewers' favor. They knocked out Bob Forsch early, and lefty Mike Caldwell was on top of his game. He held the Cardinals to 3 hits, 2 of which were off the bat of Darrell Porter. Milwaukee added 4 more runs late in the game, and it was the widest margin of defeat in a World Series opener since the White Sox in 1959, 10-0 blowout. In game 2, Milwaukee again took an early lead after 3 innings, led 3-0. So 12 innings into the season, the Brewers, things were playing out sort of like people expected. The Brewers were outslugging the Cardinals. They had outscored them 13-0 through 12 innings, but the Cardinals battled back. They tied the game in the 6th inning on Darrell Porter's 2-run double.
Sutton ready, and the 1-2 pitch, Hendricks goes, and it flies to left field. In pitch, in zone overthrow. Here comes Hendricks, tied up on a double by Darrell Porter the other way. The ball gets away, and Porter's going to third, and he will stay there.
So the decisive run was a bases loaded walk to Steve Braun, and the Cardinals won 5-4, and that was a big victory heading back to Milwaukee. They needed that win, and they got it, and suddenly the series was even. So back in Milwaukee, game 3, of course, Cardinal fans know this as the McGee game. The rookie center fielder, who few people around the league knew. This was kind of his, he burst on the scene that day. He robbed Molitor of extra bases early. He took Pete Vukovich deep twice with a 3-run home run in the 5th and a solo home run in the 7th. And then in the 9th, he robbed Gorman Thomas of a home run. So Whitey Herzog called it one of the greatest World Series games ever played, and kind of made a legend out of McGee in the eyes of Cardinal fans. Cardinals won the game 5-2 and had a 2-1 series lead. Now, game 4 was a disappointing one for the Cardinals. They took an early lead on this play, which you don't see very often. 2-run scoring on a sacrifice fly.
High fly ball, center field. Thomas is going back. It'll score at least one. I say one because Ozzie Smith can run. Gorman Thomas falls. They're going to try to score two. Here comes the relay throw. It is not in time. Well, that's something. That wind just kept pushing me back to the warning track, and we have talked about the Cardinals' speed. They showed it in game 2 on the turf, and Ozzie Smith gives another RBI, sacrifice fly, 2 RBIs, a very unusual official scoring decision that you see one time a year, maybe once every couple of years. Gorman just keeps backpedaling, slips right here as the wind really fooled him, blowing much stronger up high. Watch out, he's throwing home all the way, Joe. All the way, and Chuck Hiller says, keep on coming. He picked it up, he really did it on his own, and Hiller says, here you go.
Tony, that's why I said they're going to score one easily, because you could see him really cranking up the engines at second base. He was ready to go, and once Gorman Thomas went down, he was able to score.
That's just an example of the type of pressure the Cardinals' speed put on opposing defenses. But the Cardinals kind of had a meltdown in that game. They had a 5-1 lead heading into the bottom of the 7th. But the Brewers scored 6 runs on 5 hits, 3 walks, and an error, and won the game 7-5 and to even the series. Game 5, the Cardinals out-hit the Brewers 15-11, but Robin Yount had his second 4 hit of the game, and Caldwell again outdueled Forsch, and the Brewers took that game 6-4. So this is heading back to St. Louis. They had a 3-2 lead, and the Cardinals season now rested on the shoulders of a rookie, John Stuper, who was going to take on Don Sutton, future Hall of Famer. This game was perhaps best remembered for a lot of rain delays. There were 2 long delays that totaled nearly 2.5 hours. The Cardinals scored early and often off of Sutton. Home runs by Darryl Porter and Keith Hernandez. Had a successful squeeze by Tom Herr. And Stuper stayed in the game despite all the rain delays and went the distance, and the Cardinals won 13-1, sending the series to a deciding Game 7. The pitching matchup in Game 7 was Andahar versus Vukovic, so each team's ace, and both pitchers were on early on. Now Vukovic tended to pitch with a lot of base runners. He allowed a lot of walks and a lot of hits. He had very high pitch counts, and but through 3 innings, even though the Cardinals had a lot of base runners, it was a scoreless game. They finally broke it open in the 4th inning. McGee scored the first run of the game on Lonnie Smith's infield single. After 4 innings, the Cardinals had 7 hits, 2 walks, but only 1 run. And then Ben Ogilvy hit a home run in the 5th to tie the game 1-1. Milwaukee took the lead in the 6th on a Gantner double and then a Andahar error. And the Brewers had a lead in the 6th inning, and I thought this was a really cool quote from Ted Simmons in an interview a couple of years ago. He said, "I never felt anything like it as a professional baseball player or anywhere else I've walked the face of this earth. That very moment in that very game at that very time, I thought I was going to win the World Series and was convinced of it." But the Cardinals weren't done. In the bottom of the 6th, Ozzie Smith singled, Lonnie Smith doubled, and Gene Tennis walked, setting up a bases-loaded situation for Keith Hernandez, who tied the game with a 2-run single. George Hendrick then put the Cards ahead 4-3 with a single of his own. Now, there was a bench-clearing incident in Game 7 in the top of the 7th inning after Jim Gantner called Joaquin Andahar what as they were walking off the field. So after that incident, the bench is cleared. Andahar and Gantner had words. Whitey pulled Andujar from the game and put in Bruce Sutter for the final 2 innings. In the bottom of the 8th, the Cardinals got some insurance runs. Lonnie Smith hit a ground rule double. With 2 out, Darrell Porter singled to make it 6-3, and then Steve Braun added a pinch hit single to make it 6-3. In the top of the 9th, Bruce Sutter had to face Ted Simmons, got him on a ground out. Ben Ogilvy grounded out to Tom Herr, and then Gorman Thomas came up with 2 outs.
Sugar from the belt to the plate. A swing and a series winner for the Cardinals. Sugar throws his mask into the air. The players converge around the mound. The police arrive on the scene. The canine patrol and the mounted patrol, some fans managed to get on the field, but they needn't do that, and they won't be out there very long. The Cardinals have won the game 6-3. The Cardinals have won the National League Pennant, and the Cardinals have won the 1982 World Series. The final score 6-3.
The great Jack Buck, of course, on that call. So the Cardinals really outplayed the Brewers kind of statistically in every facet of the game. They outscored them 39-33. They had 4 more extra base hits. They had 7 stolen bases compared to the Brewers 1. The Cardinals pitchers held the combination of Simmons, Ogilvy, Thomas, and the Brewers DHs to a 160 average. And Darrell Porter was named series MVP with the 286 average, a couple of doubles, a home run, and 5 RBIs. And that was the Cardinals' 9th championship. All right, so that's all I have. Thank you so much. It was a challenge to fit a whole season and a whole book into 40 minutes, but I appreciate your attention. And I'm happy to go over any of the trivia questions if you need any of those repeated, and we can go over answers.
All right. Do we have any questions for Eric?
I've got a question for him. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, okay. So you interviewed a number of these players with that. Did they think that Porter was the true MVP in terms of everything he did?
That's a good question. There wasn't really an obvious choice for the MVP award. Obviously, Willie McGee's Game 3 alone could have earned him the nod. Joaquin Andujar certainly was deserving as well. Even Dane Orge with his 9 hits and 17 at bats. But I think Darrell Porter was certainly well respected by his teammates. He had a good series. It was kind of hard to argue, and also, of course, he was coming off a kind of comeback season after dealing with some addiction issues, and that was very public at the time, so that may have factored in. I didn't ask specifically about to the guys I talked to about that, but my hunch is that they would have they were fine with him getting that nod.
Thank you.
Yep.
So Eric, I have a question. In your research, what surprised you the most out of that season?
A couple things come to mind. I think how good the pitching was. The team certainly, like I said, known for its speed. Even the title of my book says so. But it was really the pitching that carried the team down the stretch in that sort of unprecedented streak that I mentioned earlier. Joaquin Andahar was outstanding. Bob Force was just a solid starter, and of course Bruce Suter at the back of the bullpen. So I guess I didn't appreciate coming into the project how good the pitching staff was, and I also didn't realize just how deep the roster was. It was really can't emphasize that enough, how the bench stepped up and really kept the team afloat at several points during the season. Guys like Doug Bear and Mike Ramsey and even Glenn Brummer, guys that don't get all the accolades, but were without their contributions, it's likely they would not have won the division that year.
Thanks.
Eric, got a question for you. If you were 3 years old at the time of this World Series, were your parents Cardinal fans, and did you interview them to get a perspective on the season for purposes of your book?
So neither of my parents were big baseball fans. They kind of, I think I forced them to become fans when I started, kind of fell in love with the game. You know, they took me to that first game in '86, but they weren't nearly as into the game as I was. So they probably wouldn't have been able to offer too much in terms of interviewing them, but certainly without them taking me to that first game, and who knows, maybe I don't fall in love with the game and the team like I did. So I do give them a lot of credit. So if there are no other questions, or no one needs any of the questions repeated, I can go over the answers, and people can kind of see how they did with the trivia. So the first question was, name the 3 full-time managers employed by the Cardinals during the 70s. Red Schoendienst, Vern Rapp, and Ken Boyer were the 3 answers. So that's a point for each of those. Against what team did Whitey Herzog get his first big league hit, and what pitcher did he get off of? He got it against the Yankees, and it was Don Larson on the mound. What team drafted Ozzie Smith in 1976? It was actually the Detroit Tigers. He did not sign, went back for his senior year of college, and then, of course, was drafted by the Padres. The baseball writers picked the Montreal Expos to win the NL East in 1982. That question 5 was about the Cy Young Award winner. It was Steve Carlton, won the NL Cy Young Award that year. On May 5th, what pitcher recorded his 3,000th strikeout? That was Fergie Jenkins of the Cubs. The 2 Cardinals All-Stars in '82 were Ozzie Smith and Lonnie Smith. So point for each of those. The 4 men inducted into the Hall of Fame in '82. 2 of these are maybe easier than the other 2. Henry Aaron and Frank Robinson were 2. The other 2 were Travis Jackson and Happy Chandler. So point for each of those. What player led the Cardinals in WAR in '82? It was Lonnie Smith. He had a WAR of 6 something. And then what did Jim Gantner call Joaquin Andahar that caused a bench clearing incident in Game 7? He called him a hot dog. So those are your 10 questions. There should be 17 points possible. So you tally up your points, and or maybe put your score in the chat. Whoever got the highest one, I'll send you a book.
Any more? So I think Tom wins.
Who's as SABR virtual?
Oh, that's me, but I'm not eligible. So
Oh, okay. All right.
I won with 5. I can't believe that. I missed the hot. I forgot about the hot dog. I thought he called him a cheater. I couldn't remember that. Now that you said that, that's funny. But I have to tell you a quick story. 1982, that game 7, 2 friends and I, that we were all diehard Cardinal fans, we looked around and for some reason we couldn't watch it at home. I don't remember why. We found some small bar and they had this small TV, and we were like, for some reason, like we're the only a few guys in the bar, and we were watching that game, and of course when the final out came, like we're going crazy, and it's like we're looking around like somebody should be celebrating with us, but we were like I don't know. This was Central Iowa. I guess we were in an area that was kind of split between Twins and Cubs and minor Cardinals at the time. So, but no.
We're in Central Iowa, Tom.
In Marshalltown.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, these friends and I, every year we'd make a pilgrimage down to St. Louis to see ball games and things. And when we could afford to go down, we'd make it like a whole week, and we'd go down and see Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. But Eric, thanks a lot. This was fascinating. It was wonderful to relive that season.
Thank you very much. And I assume the Central Illinois chapter is probably a good mix of Cardinals, Cubs fans, and maybe a few White Sox. Is that kind of the demographic?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just put in chat a link to the book from McFarland Books. And then Eric is also happy to personally mail signed copies with free shipping at $28 per book. So Eric, if we want to do that, what should we do?
Yeah, I'll put my email address here. I just put it in the chat, so you can email me directly, and then however you want to pay, PayPal or Venmo works. If you want to send me a check, that's fine too. Any of those forms work. But yeah, just you get in touch with me by email, and we can I can get your contact information and get a book in the mail.
Can you put up that email again?
Yeah, it's
It's in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
I'll check
EW Vickrey at Yahoo.
Oh, okay, thank you.
All right. Well, let's give Eric a round of applause and thank him for the presentation tonight. It was really great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.